Thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative. First thing that popped to my head was, have any statistical models or computerized statistical models been done or performed on any specific areas to bear out whether or not this would, as I think everyone in this room would probably conclude, implode on itself? So in other words, have the numbers been run in any given neighborhood where you pointed out some good ones, Rumstick Point, etc., like my town, Foster? Apply it to a town like that, it would crumble. Everything would die. Has anybody done that on any level, anywhere?
I have. Before I filed my lawsuit, I went through statistics in Woonsocket. I went through their property taxes for the past 2 decades. And what you find out is that in most communities, the top 25% taxpayers pay about 50% of the tax burden in the town. And it doesn't matter if you're in Woonsocket or Barrington or Bristol. There's that high-end group that are carrying the load. And you find that in Providence too. The east side is basically bailing out the whole city of Providence right now. Statistically, you reach a point that there are points where systems break down. Exponential curves, you got that point where the curve goes like this, and you reach that point, that tipping point, and there's no recovery, as Woonsocket has now found. They hit that point. Statistically, you can put that point on virtually any community and say, okay, based on income levels, based on the impact to a whole bunch of things, you can point to that knee in the curve, so to speak, and say, okay, here's where you will collapse and burn.
So essentially, you're saying Woonsocket is a living model of what I just asked if we computerize.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, like everything in Rhode Island, how do you follow the money on this? Who do you think has the most to gain in pushing this type of plan financially?
Well,
developers?
You as a taxpayer have given your money to HUD to use properly. HUD has a giant bucket of lots of money. So they've been looking literally for a place to extend the results out of the Westchester case. And they've made it public that they want to take the Westchester case nationwide. So following the money, there's a giant bucket at the federal level. HUD can't find a willing partner. They found a willing partner in the state of Rhode Island with Governor Chafee, who said, gee, white hats are really great. And so the question of money, you're not really following the money, so to speak. It's the money that's been promised, that if this plan can get adopted, here's the big bucket by which you draw from.
Who in the state of Rhode Island is going to help push this through that would benefit them financially?
Well, there's an entire infrastructure of people whose job will depend on working in some facet of whether it's Rhode Island housing. There are lots of people who will have gainful employment for decades out of this, and certainly developers would certainly benefit from this. And I don't they work hard. Developers work hard for what they do. So I'm not going to discredit them. They'll seize the opportunity. That's what's really happening here. So where there's opportunity, they sniff it out. Mike?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that bucket of money you talked about. Given the last election, that could change. Here's a copy of a U.S. Congress Journal. It shows that, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we're not the only ones screaming this. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill last year to reduce or eliminate that bucket of money for HUD for exactly the reasons that Gary talked about. Now, of course, the Senate didn't act on it. It might act on it now.
In January.
So maybe. I don't know if it's going to be one of their top priorities or not. But we're not alone in this. I mean, and it says to impose racial composition and income zoning requirements and give HUD too much power over local zoning decisions. So people are aware of this federally. So we're not alone. We're not crying wolf here. This is a legitimate issue. We don't know if that bucket of money will be reduced. This is a document that just shows Rhode Island one of 16 such sustainable community developments. And there's probably more. So again, we're not alone in all this. The developer angle is interesting that Gary brought up. I had a conversation with the Rhode Island Builders Association. They're one of the original supporters of all this. Again, a lot of groups supported the nice sounding goals at this point. right? And they are nice sounding goals. We talked about the conflict they have within their organization. Yes, some developers are going to get really rich building these projects, but the most of the developers probably would suffer because it's going to mean a reduction in the number of single-family homes being built because they're going to be zoned out of existence if this happens. So a few people will get it and a lot of people will suffer.
I've always been opposed to these unfunded state mandates that impose their requirements on the local communities. And they're usually unfunded mandates, which I think are totally wrong. In the case of HUD and Rhodemap, it's just the opposite. They're funded mandates, but their funding comes with very strong strings attached and penalties and incentives and carrots and sticks. So that if the state of Rhode Island accepts the HUD funding, they're told what to do and how to do it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in terms of Rhodemap Rhode Island, because we have a contingent of people who are sympathetic or simpatico with what HUD's trying to do. And the local communities are going to find themselves pretty much mandated by the state planning division to implement the HUD standards, as you pointed out.
Yes, which, by the way, to be clear, those standards already exist. It's just that the enforcement mechanism has been missing. And that should be made clear, because for someone to say Rhodemap would change things, the only thing Rhodemap is going to do is put a hammer to this nail, and that's really what.
But let me say, the funding it's not 100% funded by HUD. You know where the rest of it comes from?
EPA, Department of Transportation,
No.
taxpayers.
The slide we looked at the consortium meeting, and this part shows that if your city and town is picked to have one of these growth centers, that the Rhodemap Rhode Island will work with the legislature to do away with your property tax cap, so that your property taxes can go up to help pay for this.
Well, HUD has no money except ours.
So you'll get some money from HUD, and then you and us will be asked to fund whatever else is left. How many of you will, and politically, and we have some elected officials here, locally and statewide, how many of you want to be, involved with something that's going to see local property taxes go up to fund an experiment, as Gary said? So remember, this is a piece they're trying to hide. That we were sitting in that slideshow and we saw that. Holy crap! This is big.
Let me point to one, if I could, just to clarify this. It may not be just your community. You may be forced to partner with communities. So Barrington could be forced to partner with Warren, Bristol. In other words, an East Bay consortium. And you won't have a choice on this, because there will be voting members, and if you're outvoted as the town of Barrington or the town of Warren because you just don't want it, sorry, you've just been outvoted. And this is one of the things that they ran into out in San Francisco when they were trying to do this kind of planning, is it all boiled down to the voting cooperatives. And, you think you've got town rights and it's, you've got local control. This is all going to begin to disappear by voting collaboratives, so to speak.
I guess I'm having a hard time making the connection to the analogy about the hammer and the nail. If a community takes HUD money now, they have to comply with HUD regulations. Am I correct?
If there was an enforcement arm, yes. HUD doesn't bring a lawsuit. There are no lawsuits to be filed by HUD. They have law firms whose job it is to do it as a proxy for HUD. And that's what Westchester did. Westchester was a private lawsuit. It was not done by HUD. HUD sort of sponsored it and supported it, but it was still a private law firm. So there will be, you know how law firms are, and forgive, saying to the attorneys, but there will be law firms who now specialize in this one thing.
Who is the client?
The client is it can be anyone. There was a
and their
case.
standing is based on HUD's regulations, correct?
It's the interpretation. The federal agencies, just like regular administrative agencies here in the state, are allowed to interpret the rules, and there's deference that's always given to, well, if the agency interprets it this way, this is, how it must be. We see that with Rhode Island housing. So HUD says this is our point of view, The law firm then says, okay, we will take that point of view and we will put it into court, and we will sue.
So under what happened in Westchester, there was no state law that enabled the plaintiffs to sue, am I correct?
Well, it was done in federal court, but there's something, in federal court you have circuits. In New York, it's the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And in the Second Circuit, which is different than us in the First Circuit, they have something called the Huntington Rule. And the Huntington Rule was a decision that was made against Huntington, Long Island. Huntington, Long Island, it was a corner lot that was zoned residential. And so a group wanted to put low-income housing on the lot, but it was zoned residential and the town did not want to change it. And so a case was made that, look, it's not being used for anything. You're discriminating if you hold it apart from, you know, the good people of Huntington. And so the Circuit Court of Appeals said, you're right. It is discriminatory to hold that as single-family zoning. Therefore, we rule in favor of the plaintiffs who want to put low-income housing there.
And that's because they took federal money from HUD?
Yes.
Okay, so why does HUD need Rhodemap Rhode Island in the first place?
Go ahead. No, you take it.
So what happened in recent years? Well, Gary's right. The HUD had been giving money out for decades. Well, under the Obama administration, in order to accelerate the enforcement, they're now creating sustainable development regions. Up until Governor Chafee in Rhode Island, regions consisted of cities or counties or a group of counties, and they were regions. So these are now, so those regions are now responsible for enforcing the HUD programs in their region. Some of the regions are even multi-state. Down in Tennessee, there's Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia, a 16-county region. And the region is now responsible for enforcing the HUD mandates rather than everything coming, but as a proxy, like Gary said, for HUD. So Rhode Island is now a region, or would become a region on its own. Okay, because we would be the first state to be a region.
And so Rhodemap sets up regions, and these regions could take...
No, Rhodemap becomes one of the regions that would become a proxy for HUD. Now, there's important, he's talking about connecting the dots. The proponents of this plan have a technical point, but not a realistic one, when they say there's nothing in this plan that says any of this stuff. It's true. The plan says nothing, by the way. But we all know what comes next. It opens the door for more HUD funding that then opens the door for all the things that Gary just talked about. That's where our research is coming. We know what's happened in other states. We know what their MO is. We know what's going to come next. We're not stupid, like some people want you to think you are. We know what happens next. And that's an important thing. So don't let them get away with saying, well, there's nothing in this plan that says any of this stuff. Because it comes next. This plan opens the door for all those things. So that's connecting the dots. But Rhode Island would become a region, and the Social Equity Advisory Committee would basically be the one that would cry foul if they thought that any part of the HUD requirements weren't being fairly implemented.
I've got a couple of questions. The Social Equity Advisory Council Committee that you talked about, what are the names of those individuals involved and where that comes from? I know in our own town, we tried to set a resolution forward to the state of Rhode Island that they would do away with the deed restriction to low and affordable, which seems to be one of the stumbling points, because I know in our own community we have trailer parks, mobile homes, people in subsistence, they get welfare. Those individuals should be included in the count, and they're not currently included in the count because the deed restriction doesn't go with the property. So, if I leave here tonight, what are the actionable moves going forward? Because our own community is going to go through a full comprehensive plan redo, which is mandated by the state again. Okay, so we've hired a firm to come in and do comp plan. We're talking about TDRs. We're talking about TOD, transit-oriented developments. These are all, I believe, if I'm hearing you correctly, bullet points that we should be paying attention to in our own communities. And the developers themselves, when they move into these developments, when they subscribe to this low and affordable quotient, they can get greater density of use in those properties. So there's an economic incentive for the developer themselves to come in and do this. Now, if I leave here tonight, I've been to 2 meetings already, what I'd like to see, is there something that we have moving forward that actionable words or agenda that we have that we can actually move forward and kind of put a roadblock in? I think at the least we should know who's on the Social Equity Advisory Committee, okay? To know who leads it. And then if we need to let her write or do whatever we have to do, again, here, I hear the problem, I understand the problem. What's the movement forward going to be, and how do we reconcile? How do we come up with a resolution to defeat this?
Well, okay, let me take it sort of one at a time here. I have been hoping that some town solicitor or city solicitor would finally raise the question, what about Article 13 of the Rhode Island Constitution that guarantees every town governance over local matters? I have been hoping that a town solicitor would ask that question and say, how dare you come into our town and tell us how to run our local zoning? Because right here in the Rhode Island Constitution, it says, nobody's asked that question. If you look at all the case law that exists, you won't find a challenge based on Rhode Island constitutional grounds. So I've been hoping that there was some town that had the desire and the willingness to spend some money, maybe share expenses with another town that said, wait a minute, this whole thing is unconstitutional. Because it says right here that we have home rule over local matters, and zoning is a local matter. Now, an interesting point on that, when Rosmart did their rebuttal on everything that people like Mike and I were saying in the press, they came out and said, well, HUD can't take over local zoning because you have home rule protections under the Rhode Island Constitution. I sat there and I was reading that and I said, yes, but then how do you get away with the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act telling you that you have to do inclusionary zoning? So these are certain questions that do need to be answered. Go ahead.
We put out yesterday, this letter's on our website. This is a letter from HUD, April of this year, to Westchester County. As part of the settlement, the county, this is what it says, must acknowledge its legal duty to HUD's affirmatively furthering fair housing. Legal duty, federal mandates. And think of Westchester County as Rhode Island. Westchester County is 31 municipalities, 39, not the same. And it must amend its zoning submission for the 31 municipalities. Federal law superseding state law, local zoning. Right here. They say it, they demand it, right in their own letter. So for them to tell you that that's a bogus issue, here it is in writing. Right here, it's on our website, just go to it. Right. And the courts, right, have been ruling in HUD's favor. Federal mandates have to carry more legal weight than local law.
So the next question, of course, is what can you do about this at the federal level? Well, right now, the simple thing is you don't take any more CDBG grants. You simply stop and say, wait a minute, there are too many strings attached. It's a Trojan horse. I don't want any more. I don't know how that would go over in the community, whether or not you'd be sued because you refused to take it. But I have, written to my own town council members and said, look, this is toxic money. At this point in time, it is toxic money. That has the potential of destroying the fabric of our community. So don't take it anymore.
And just raising awareness locally in a town council meeting of all these issues will kill it. Pretty much.
Yes.
But you need to get
Depends on
people
what
there.
council you sit on.
Yeah, you need to get people there, and because this cannot survive sunlight. It can only happen if they sneak it through like they tried to sneak this whole plan through. Thank God we didn't let them.
Yeah, question.
I guess the other question I would have is that this plan is being touted as an economic development plan. Other than your talk about developers, where is the economic development? I don't see it. I see depression out of it, but I don't, maybe I'm missing it.
No, I did this professionally for 35 years, and I looked, and I couldn't find it. And if this was a plan that I had submitted to my management back in the days before I was retired, I'd be quietly let out the door. There's nothing in here that does risk analysis, and that's the big issue is, whenever you're going to put money, you want to know what the risk is, what your rate of return, what's the net present value, all kinds of things that you want to know about the future worth of the money that you're putting up today. And you do all those calculations. There's nothing in the plan that you could do a calculation on, and that's the problem. There is
tonight we have about 9 members of General Assembly that's going to be reconvening in January. I think what we're going to have to do is before December 11th, really put together a plan, as my colleagues said here this evening, and try to get a good nucleus, maybe 20 more members, to really stress to the fact that the vote cannot take place on December 11th. I mean, there's certain articles that I've got out in the press with Representative Morgan. I've written both letters to both Flynn and Hartford, and I think what they got to come to mind is that this is going to be suspended as far as December 11th. For us to get back in the General Assembly January 6th, and to probably call them in to either the committees on the House or Senate that has the authority to look at the plan itself and start really getting serious. Or else, my question is, do we still have, can we go back in and put a piece of legislation to repeal the whole plan?
Yeah, I think that's the best thing you as legislators can do. I fielded calls from other, on both sides of the aisle, just today even, and I think that's, and for you, the rest of you, to contact your state reps, and pressure leadership and your rep to say, don't do something that we then have to undo in the next session. Why do it in the first place? Let's just, you don't have to say we're opposed to it, you don't have to say we're for it. Let's just be prudent and really run this through the public ringer, through hearings. We're going to actually be recommending a totally different approach in the next week before December 11th. But really, you're right, Senator Rectiger said a vote on December 11th would make it much more difficult to undo than if we never have the vote in the first place. Because, and I want to give you a quick legislative history, especially for those of you in the legislature. This was all part of a plan, a scheme. The RFP went out for this to hire the firm to put this plan together in 2 years ago, in 2012. In 2013, 6 months later, or 3 or 4 months later, is when the enabling legislation that requires the state or the planning council to put together an act on our plan happened. So it happened after the fact. Now, the initial piece of legislation out of the House was pretty straightforward. We should have an economic development plan. It went to the Senate, and it came back to the House as a sub-B with a paragraph in there about social equity. And that's what opened the door, and that's what allowed an economic development plan to get hijacked and become something very different. You're right, it's not an economic development plan. So legislatively, you have that requirement in there. There's also a requirement that the Planning Commission adopt the plan this quarter. In fact, they're already late for it. So the letter that Rep. Morgan and Blake, you signed, and others signed, said that we will extend you legislative immunity, basically, saying forget the deadline. Everybody does anyway around here. But we'll don't worry about the deadline. Let's think about it and let's take a prudent approach. So that's really, I think, legislatively, while we educate the public on this, and Gary's doing a fabulous job because he's lived through it. I think legislatively, yeah, we gotta not have that vote on December.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not done by December 11th, if it's not done during Governor Chafee's tenure, because Governor Chafee, I believe, was wholeheartedly in support of this roadmap. It was his idea.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So if it's not done, if we get a delay until January, I think the governor's signature is required for it to go any further towards
Actually, no, there's nothing. Once it's adopted, it's adopted.
Adopted by whom?
It requires, once it's adopted by the planning council, as scheduled on December 11th, there is no action required by the governor or the General Assembly for it to be adopted into the state guidelines.
That's scary.
Yeah, unless you were to repeal it. Right, so the General Assembly basically has been cut out of this process. And you guys shouldn't take that, if I were you. Especially when it has property tax increases and all that, and neither should we as citizens. So that, yeah, it looks like it reads that the General Assembly should approve it, but upon closer inspection, it does not. And,
that's scary.
We brought that up to the Speaker's office through a contact there just 2 hours before we pulled the plug on it. I don't know if that was the final piece, for it or not, but I think as General Assembly, yeah, you don't want to be bypassed on something like this. Yes, sir.
Stanley, on this you say that we won't have any legislative opportunity to vote on. Now, if I interpreted what y'all said earlier, we already have in the sub-B.
The sub-B just required that there be a plan.
So would that be considered the enabling legislation that allowed this to happen? Therefore, they are operating under legislative authority?
Yes.
So the vote has already happened. We've already said.
Well, to create a plan, but then to approve the specific plan that they came up with is another step, right? So, no one said it had to be that plan.
Could I make one more point for everybody's information, which is kind of off track but related? HUD is not the only federal agency in coordinating this funding on the Rhode Island. There's also EPA, Department of Transportation, federal. Now, EPA is now in the process of trying to amend the Clean Water Act to eliminate the word navigable from the definition of waters. And if EPA is successful in doing that, then every stream that runs through the backyard now comes under the auspices of EPA. For EPA to kind of dictate. And this is and land use is a big part of, allegedly, a big part of the roadmap Rhode Island. So that's another aspect of this whole thing that people aren't giving a lot of thought to and aren't really monitoring what EPA is doing over here, while roadmap Rhode Island and HUD are doing something with the left hand.
That's a very good point. While housing is the focus, it's also about energy, transportation use, land use, and water use.
Climate change.
And we brought to attention to the consortium. Of course, they didn't care here, but it was a bill that we think was part of this. Of course, you can't directly tie it together. In 2013, some of you may remember it. That we created a House Bill 6099 that would have created a new water authority. And I'm not kidding you when I said almost verbatim that the bill said, to your point about navigable waters, is that this new water authority would have the authority to go onto any property at any time to determine if above ground or below ground water on that property somehow might impact the state's overall water supply, and if they felt that it did, it could seize that property by eminent domain. It almost said that verbatim in the bill. We wrote about it in 2013. They tried to sneak it by. They submitted it after the normal submission period. They tried to sneak it by. Some of the good government groups and us raised their hands and they quickly pulled it. Again, they try to sneak this stuff by you. So vigilance at the town level, looking out for anything to do with land use decisions, water, transportation, energy, your energy. They say we're going to provide you more energy and transportation options. They want to limit or make you pay for the things we're used to doing right now. Just like they want to make you pay for living outside of the government preferred zone by having two-tier tax system like Gary talked about.
I can tell you that the two-tier tax system is coming. If you live outside of certain areas, you will find your tax bill considerably higher than those inside. It's coming. Yes?
Is the roadmap plan set of aspirational goals, or does it have enforceable law?
Well, there are goals that are set out. They quantify them in terms of, fluffy goals like, we will have empowerment committees to empower the, selected industries to have, empowered employees through empowering training. And so they talk general, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we could just wipe the slate clean and start society from scratch kinds of things.
But without the action by the General Assembly, so they can talk and they can pass all the plans they want, saying this is what we believe should happen. But the General Assembly would have to.
Right, but you won't necessarily know. They're not going to say, oh, here's a roadmap Rhode Island bill. They're gonna, so this is going to be the guide that legislators are supposed to be following, the goals in that plan. So we create legislation to advance this goal. So imagine what a legislation would be that would enforce income, equality in a neighborhood. What would that look like? So now you're going to have to keep fighting off bills because they already have relationships with many legislators. So why should we subject ourselves to that? Having to figure out what bill is part of this, what bill is intended. This becomes the guide from which legislators are supposed to introduce bills to meet those goals. So we just think that it'd be much better if we didn't have it in the first place, rather than try to undo it afterwards.
Yes, question.
Actually, I think I can do an analogy for that.
Great.
Comprehensive plans are required by the towns, cities and towns. Now, it was originally presented as it's a guideline. It's only a guideline. It won't impact what you do. It's a guideline. Next thing you know, they're pulling out the comprehensive plan and using it in a court of law. This is law. This is what you said you were going to do. This is what your plan is. This is law. So what I see this is, if it gets into state planning, even if they're terming it a guideline, it soon becomes, it rolls down into your comprehensive plan and becomes law. And nobody votes on it.
Right. So we in Barrington experienced that with the Sweetbriar project, in which the comprehensive community plan was the guidebook that the state Supreme Court used in rendering their decision. They kept pointing back to the comprehensive plan.
Exactly.
So it had force in a court of law.
Mark, I think, Mark G., you have an interesting story in East Greenwich. Do you want to share that with everybody?
Well, it's not directly concerning this, but it's under the existing Rhode Island law where I was on the town council, and someone came and said, what's happening on Route 2? And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, the developers are building a 10-unit parcel on a piece of land that doesn't meet the requirements, doesn't meet current zoning, and so we asked a few questions, what's going on, and our local affordable housing lady said, well, we're building these units here, 10 units, and we don't have to do the water test, we don't have to do the standard, we don't have to get a traffic study to see what the impact will be as people go in and out of Route 2, which is a busy road. And so we learned under current laws, forget about the roadmap Rhode Island, we have no say. And the affordable housing people were not too polite in saying, don't bother us. We have HUD's blessing, and this is the way it's going to be. So what happens? You go to a nice little neighborhood, and there's a couple that's been there for 40 years, paying their taxes, doing everything they should do, right next to this thing. And they said, we don't want to live here. We don't want, so they put their house up for sale, and they sold it, taking approximately $100,000 less than market price. And another couple in a house on the other side did the same thing, lost about $100,000 because of this existing, well, in the process of being built. So I think the thing that scares me is the fact that the town had no say in the matter. Under existing laws, forget about roadmap Rhode Island. So I'm very, very concerned about this project.
It's all about control. Control.
Keep in mind that thank you for sharing that story, but you take it up a notch, and I just wrote a article in my local paper, Affordable Housing on Steroids. And the issue is, right now, you're doing affordable housing without the component of how many minorities are living in the area. Once that gets in there, and developers know that they can go into any neighborhood, it doesn't have to be on Route 2 and perhaps a lesser lot. It can be in, High Hawk or Lumstick Point or Papa Squash, and the developer will say, I don't find any of the right populations in this area, so therefore I have carte blanche to come in and put up development. And that is part of this whole initiative. HUD has made clear that the initiative is for diversity. It is not economic development. It's to get diversity at every level in Westchester and every other community throughout the country.
The underserved population.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this, but when this thing was getting underway, the developer, Affordable Housing, said, this is going to be for elderly people. This is going to be elderly housing. So they lied. They flat out lied about what the project was. You can't trust them. They're not. They have no integrity. They're certainly not honest. So what's next? And when I hear the term central planning, I say to myself, wait a minute. When's the last time I read about central planning? Well, back in the Cold War days, before then, when the central planners were going to make everything wonderful in the Soviet Union.
Serious stuff.
Yeah, really
Serious
is.
stuff.
Welcome to Stalingrad.
So, in sum, I think public awareness is going to help in this issue, and that's the whole point of a meeting like this. Is public awareness has to be out there, because what's happening right now, I mean, is if you like your doctor, you don't lose your doctor. You won't lose your plan.
If you like your neighborhood.
Yes, this is exactly where we are.
Hope it changes.
So, with that, if there are,
Could I ask our elected officials in the General Assembly how they weigh in on this and how they think that we can stop it?
Well, I think the most important thing that has to be done is I think a lot of pressure has to be put on the House Speaker and the Senate President to say, stop the vote, suspend the vote on December 11th. Like I said earlier, the next step is for us to look at this whole plan through this certain, I'm not sure which committee in the House or which committee in the Senate will be taking up this plan and then have public testimony come in. The opposition definitely will be there, the proponents will be there, and then bring it out to the public. And the key issue of this is when it goes in front of the General Assembly Committee, now you have everybody passes the speaker, television stations, all the media, and you'll see that this thing will really become a huge political football in the state of Rhode Island this coming legislative year. But I think that's where we have to start. We have to make sure that we suspend the vote, like I said earlier, and get our, today I received a letter from my Senate President about going after National Grid. Big issue, 23% increase. And asking the PUC to hold off on the 23% increase to look at it one more time. And that's the way things have to be done. I mean, this issue really has to get on the top 5 list.
Senator, there's a tie in there. The energy, that would be part of roadmap that requires investment in green projects is what's driving up electricity costs. We testified at the bill last year. It was amazing to me how the proponents and the legislators don't give a damn tax or fee increases to you and us. They say, well, National Grid's not going to make any more money. We're going to just charge higher rates so that we can fund these green projects consistent with this plan. So what if consumer prices go up, ratepayer go up? And I sat there and said, they're crowing about how they're meeting this green energy standard, but at the same time, excuse my French, but screwing the rest of it. And I said, you have your priorities backwards. You should care about the people, not some arbitrary standard. Rhode Island's one of the leading states in the nation for funding green projects. Big deal. We're in last place in our economy.
And now they're looking at.
So same concept that's driving this, but they're tied together, Senator. Energy increases are because of thinking like this.
I'd like to suggest.
In line with that energy situation, I read what was a little blurb in the paper. They're getting ready to auction off blocks in the Northeast, offshore blocks, which will be used to. They'll auction it off to the highest bidder, to the developer, of course, who gets all the subsidies, federal, state, and coming down the road, to put in wind turbines and along with deep water wind and
We've been fighting that.
Cape wind projects.
I might ask if anyone has an interest in having a conversation with the speaker, that they bring a copy of this map and ask the speaker to explain what, Western Cranston, why is this so dark over here and these colors here? And he might get his attention by, so, yes, you can find this, it's right in the roadmap document. Yes.
I just wanted to make one point. Affordable housing isn't really affordable housing. In 2000, when we were fighting some affordable housing in Exeter, we tried to tell them we had 2 trailer parks and they were certainly affordable housing. Well, they aren't. It has to be something with HUD money. And after 30 years, it's no longer considered affordable housing, so it goes away. So it's like this circle that you have to keep having HUD money come into your account.
Yes.
I just have some comments. Also, when developers go under and some of their property, some of their lots have to be affordable, they can't finish the project, then those lots become property of Rhode Island housing. And they're off the tax rolls. And they can sit there for years. That's another thing that we've discovered in Tiverton. But I do want to answer that lady's question over there. I do appreciate the emails that came out to the town council addresses. Thank you. That certainly sent up a red flag. Immediately when I saw that, I sent that off to town clerk to get it to the rest of, just to make sure that everybody read it, the rest of the town council. I also sent it to the town administrator and said, what's the deal here? And what does the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns think about this? And he did immediately, went to the league and got an answer that said, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm like, wait a minute, we should be worried about it. He didn't agree with that answer, and he was going to be taking steps to see if he could change the league. But I would recommend if your town is in the league, get your town administrator or whatever to contact the league and get them on the stick and get them involved, because this is critical. We had a town council meeting on Monday night. Was that last night? Yes, it was. Yes. And since it was a swearing-in ceremony, we had some of our senators and our reps there, state reps, and I actually approached them and said, what is this deal with Rhodemap Rhode Island? And I got, yes, we know about it. Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it in the next session. That's what I got for an answer. And I'm like, okay. And that didn't give me a warm and fuzzy. So,
not to interrupt you, because I feel very comfortable speaking at Pete.
Yes.
Is that your name? When you were speaking, I'm a representative-elect, and I feel very responsible to my district and the residents there to be here in this room to get more information, because I didn't feel comfortable presenting that answer to my residents. That would make them feel very uncomfortable. I wanted them to be assured that I was trying to absorb as much information as possible, because there are several intricate pieces to this that are just so dangerous to the future of Rhode Island. And it's not just my district. When we all sit in the room to vote together as colleagues, we're voting for the best interest and future of Rhode Island. That answer to me, what you were given, I could never give that answer and assure my people that I knew what the hell I was talking about is really what it is. the legislators in this room are looking for that information and that security to know that when we step forward and deny this vote, which can't happen on the 11th because it's so dangerous. And that's why I'm sitting here to make sure I don't give that answer. And I have been asked, and I said I'm working on getting further information because it's very detailed.
And why we can win this, this is not a typical partisan issue.
No.
This is, the Democrats and Republicans equally want to have sovereignty over their districts, over their local governments, because that's what they're elected to do. This is simply a big government takeover versus local government sovereignty kind of issue. So there is no counter argument once you shed light on it. That's why this can't survive the light. And so any kind of forum, you guys can, the leadership, we have 8 or 9 or 10 here today, elected officials or more. Let's have 200 next time. But we need the Speaker or the Senate President to endorse that. And let's bring up guys like Gary. I'll bring in our national expert. And we'll have it. That's what we've been calling for from day one, is a real, rigorous, open debate on this topic, because we know that it can't survive debate. It can only survive sleight of hand, backroom deals, and that kind of thing. So force the debate, and we will win.
Get the word out.
Yeah.
Facebook, social media, letters, family, friends, relatives, legislatures. Make sure that Mariello and people by Wade are copied on every letter you send, or every email you send out, so they get that deluge with information saying, hey, we're concerned about this.
Mike, do you know where those original 8 or 9 cities and towns who are on this mission, including Rockland, Cranston, Kingstown, Western, where they stand on this? I mean, they were part of looking at this, but are they all fully in support of it? You know?
It was Barrington was the one. Was it this signed on?
I don't think so.
No. Well, let me speak on behalf of one. I won't mention names. On behalf of one city and town. So I talked to one senior politician who's personally against it, but yet that town's planning council signed off on it. And I was told that part of their training is that we must plan to be social equity conscious, and that's part of the planning process now. And we have to, we violate our like the Hippocratic Oath kind of thing. We violate our oath if we didn't further a plan that advanced that kind of thing. So this is ingrained in people. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just part of the politically correct thinking these days in many circles. But they don't look to the next step of how it affects the rest of us, and that's the problem. I think the city planners signed off without necessarily. I doubt they took it to the people of their towns, and I don't even think they took it to their executive in their town. They just signed off on it because there is a Rhode Island statewide planners association.
Yes.
So and then they're all part of that, and this is the philosophy of that.
Well, planners love to plan, developers love to develop. So it's a natural fit for them. Job security, certainly.
Any more questions? They're going to hang around till the end.
I know that we handed out a paper that Mike Stenhouse's Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity put out. And I'm wondering if either one of you could address the fact that you're only talking about one big sliver of the pie, but that they're going at a little bit. If you could just address the fact that Rhodemap Rhode Island addresses integration not only of our neighborhoods, but of our businesses, of the whole thing with the farms, what's going on with the farms and the water. You talked about it a little bit, just to give a sample from each category of what they're addressing in Rhodemap Rhode Island, to give the scope of it.
Start on that one? Okay. There is a compact that businesses who come into these circles that will be high business circles with housing surrounding it will sign a compact, sort of like the same signature that when you take CDBG grants is that you will certify that you'll have living wages and you'll have, certain worker rights compacts and that you'll act responsibly. Now, I don't know any wealth creator that wants to enter into that kind of contract. They want to be able to manage their business the way they want to manage it. I cannot imagine a single business, unless it's a government entity that's working off of government funds. I know no businessman that would want to enter into one of those work zones. They'd simply move across state lines. And so part of the plan is a complete fantasy that we're going to have wealth creators who will sign up for this and bring their business and their funds into these sort of work spheres, and that they'll put their own money at risk. I've not met a businessman in my life that would enter into that kind of a deal when they have the ability to walk a few miles across state line and do it and have total freedom. So maybe someone in this room knows a businessman who would love to get into one of those, but I don't.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's on the public record yet, but it will be soon, so I don't think I'm speaking for the term, but I did have a chance to speak with Mayor Fong, and I did get to preview a letter that he has submitted to Kevin Flynn and the Division of Planning, and he made that exact point, Gary, that the burdens, the social equity burdens that will be placed on businesses, just like you said, would preclude businesses from locating here and probably, he didn't say it, but I think Gary's point is right, that also would drive out businesses already in that area. So it extends beyond housing, it extends beyond energy, it does get into your business community, it would place new burdens. In fact, that was YPEC, John Simmons' #1 complaint. He had 2 complaints, when he withdrew his support for Rhodemap Rhode Island in the consortium meeting. A, it's no longer an economic development plan, and B, it would put unnecessary new burdens on the business community. So it extends into business community as well.
Do we know what other groups out there are opposing it also? I mean, like RIPEC pulled out, are they lobbying against it, or?
I haven't heard, I think quietly behind the scenes, I've had calls, I won't mention names, but I've had calls from people who sit on the Commerce Corporation Board. I've had calls from a lot of other legislators. I've had calls from Rhode Island Builders Association. So what they've gone back and behind the scenes have done, I don't know, but I suspect there's been quite a bit of that going on. So I'm guessing that it's politically unsafe in this state to make a promise and then withdraw it, publicly anyway. But I suspect there's been a lot of rumblings behind the scenes from groups like RIPEC. RIPEC took a lot of courage to come out and say that publicly. I've actually talked to people who say, I hate this personally, but my organization has to still support it for political reasons.
I think that's a huge problem. The Chamber of Commerce, the Providence Chamber of Commerce, they think this is the best thing coming down.
Today supported it.
And Neil Steinberg, oh no, don't pay any attention to these naysayers. This is a great plan, and the Rhode Island Foundation stands firmly behind it. So I don't think you can dismiss the potential of people trying to ram this thing through.
Rosemont, Rhode Island.
Do you know it?
No, I don't.
There's the education, there's the energy, there's the transportation part where they want us all, the bike coalitions. My daughter said that she went to a meeting for a bike coalition in Philly, and it was so great. And it just raised red flags because their marketing is phenomenal. But basically, it's not just anyone who's pro-bike. I love bike riding. They want to get us out of single occupancy, not only houses, but cars.
Well, that's an option to market this to the car dealers in Rhode Island. Can't sell cars, they want bikes.
Right, and they want to reduce, if you see new bike paths coming in on your roads, like Newport, they want to make it more difficult for cars to drive down the roads and make it more user-friendly to bikes. And there's a wonderful book, I don't know if we should give the reference here, though, if you want information quickly, yes. It's Behind the Green Mask, and it's by Rosa Corey, K-O-I-R-E. and it's a fairly quick read. She's actually a Democrat, and that's why this affects all of us.
Why don't we send that out in the email?
Yeah, we'll send that out to you.
Oh, there was one more
He has a
question.
question.
Go ahead, I missed one.
Yeah, you missed one.
Education.
Education. And when we asked Mr. Flynn if he asked anybody from the Department of Education to come speak and to be part of this consortium, he said, oh yes, we sent out an invitation, but they never got back to us. And they did a whole education portion without anyone from the Department of Education. So we have this consortium who has their own ideas on what the education in Rhode Island should be without the Department of Education weighing in, without anybody from the individual cities and towns and their school departments weighing in. Not one person representing the educational system of Rhode Island was part of this consortium.